right now. I'm gonna go in the other room, Spanish. Hmm. Okay, I believe I am recording in English on this computer and Spanish on my other computer. So let's go ahead and get started because we're 2 minutes past. Welcome everybody to session 2 of trauma-informed breastfeeding. I am going to drop a sign-in sheet for this session into the chat. Just a link. Please click on that and sign yourself in, especially if you went to session 1 and you are a nurse and want CEUs for this. Also, please navigate to the bottom of your screen. You should see a little globe with an interpretation language and click on English or Spanish, depending on which language you would like to listen in. Okay, and I think we are ready to go. So I will hand it over to Carrie.
Okay, great. So let's start with a quick show of hands. Actually, let me stop sharing and then I'll have to give it back for a second. But you can put in the chat or you can use your reaction or come off camera and use your physical hand. But who was here last time? Since we've got a Crystal, you were here, Jackie, Kim, David. Those of you off camera, can you give me something in the chat or use your react buttons? They should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It always takes me a minute. Give any reaction if you were here before. Thumbs up. Okay. So I think that maybe we have a couple new folks. Some of the names look familiar though, so. Okay, Marlene was here before. Okay. Okay, well, if you are new, then, or not new, but if you weren't here before, that is fine. You will not be lost or anything. I was just curious and, always helpful to know a little bit of who we're talking to. So welcome to part 2 of trauma-informed breastfeeding. The part 1 was recorded in English, so talk to Jackie if you need to or want to view that. A little bit of housekeeping. Today we will be using the chat feature and emojis as we just did. So, figure out where to access both of those. We'll also use Mentimeter like we did last time, and you'll receive instructions when it's time to use that. And this is a small group, so feel free to raise your hand, come off of mute. That's fine as well. And as was mentioned, today's session is being recorded. All right, so quick introduction. We are Leah's Pantry. Myself and Crystal will introduce ourselves in a moment, but Leah's Pantry, we envision communities where everyone can cultivate a healthy relationship with food and their bodies. And our mission is to build and implement community nutrition and food security programs that align with trauma-informed, resilience-focused principles. We do this many ways. Here are 3 of the main ways. One is implementing and building and creating programs that can be run in community. And number 2, in the middle, that's where we are right now. We're building capacity of partner organizations. So we do a lot of trainings like this that are just kind of general capacity building that are exploring how to do whatever community work the group does and how to do that with a trauma-informed approach. So I'll let Crystal introduce herself just briefly because I think most people were here before, but say hello.
Hey, good to see y'all again if you're back. My name is Crystal Bown, and I'm a training manager at Leah's Pantry. I've worked with communities on various nutrition security programs and interventions, food pantries, community gardens, nutrition education, also walkability and movability projects. I live actually in Little Rock, Arkansas. And then on this slide, you just see all the fun things me and my husband like to go do in our free time, which includes independent bookstores, which are still thriving in the age of Amazon. So, Carrie.
Thank you, Crystal. Oops. Like I mentioned, my name is Carrie. I live in San Diego, where I believe all of you are, right? Because this is the San Diego Coalition. And I live here with my daughter and husband. And, I'll share some stories about my own breastfeeding journey with her. So coming at, this particular training with a little bit of a personal lens. And yeah, loving it in San Diego. We went swimming on December 1st and still warm enough for that. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so it's always nice to be here by the beach. Okay, so we usually like to start our trainings with a little bit of a status check, some sort of attunement or regulation. And those are two words that we're going to talk a lot about today. So this is an opportunity to kind of do a little bit of practice for something that we're going to kind of circle back to. So which emoji represents how you're feeling right now? You can use the actual emojis, you can drop it in the chat. You can just think to yourself, I'm probably a little bit of yellow, to be honest. For a 4-day weekend is great, but like everyone forgot how to do school and school drop off. And so it's been a little bit of rough mornings for us in our house. We have an upside down smiley face. I feel that. I'm not sure where it is here, but I feel it in my heart. Light green, looking forward to sitting down, listening to it. We've got some yellow with Crystal here. So hopefully Crystal and I can move into light green as we work through. I'm not going to lie, I was using some of the regulation tools this morning as my daughter was screaming her head off at school drop off. We've got a little yellow for Bart for David. Okay. Well, wherever you are, just take a moment to acknowledge it. Like that's a first step, right? To know how you are feeling and perhaps from there what you might need to move into that green space. We are going to be here for 2 hours. This is a small group. So go ahead and take a deep breath in and out and try to stay present with us this morning. So a quick review of part one. First, we defined and described what trauma-informed nutrition security is. So we talked about how nutrition security is different than food security, right? So it's not just trying to fill bellies, but it's really looking at the appropriateness of the food and the and how folks are nourished as a whole. And we realize and recognize that positive and adverse experiences shape our relationship to food, our bodies, and ourselves. So we spent a little bit of time exploring the meaning of food for you personally. And this is kind of a theme that you see when you're diving into like a trauma-informed approach, right? It starts with you. And so examining your own relationship, examining your own ability to stay regulated, which we're going to talk about today. It starts there and then can have this ripple out effect. And we discussed the impact of adverse experiences during adverse experiences and trauma during pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period. So this language is kind of getting thrown around a lot in kind of mainstream communication. And so we really spent some time last time defining what trauma is, what adverse experiences are, and how this affects the pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum and breastfeeding specifically. So that's what we did during the first session. And we ended the session asking these rhetorical questions of what can we do to reduce stigma, shame, confusion, and tension, right? When it comes to feeding littles, whether it is formula or breastfeeding or chest feeding, or even when they get bigger and it's, moving into solids, there's a lot of confusion. There is shame, there's stigma, there's tension. So what can we do to reduce that and really pull out the joyful experience that should be front and center with that, right? How joyful it is to have a little one and to be feeding them and nourishing them. So how can we leverage strengths in order to promote confidence and dignity and joy throughout this experience? How can we inspire healing and a healthy relationship with ourselves and our bodies? Whoops. And these are the questions that we're going to try to answer today. This is really moving into our response. So today's learning objectives are to describe a trauma-informed approach to lactation care, to understand the opportunity to build resilient systems for new parents and infants, to number 3, explore specific trauma-informed strategies for client conversations, and to discuss how self-care and self-awareness enables connection with others, both for yourself and for those who you may work with. So we're going to kick it off with talking about this trauma-informed approach to lactation care. So if you were with us last time, you hopefully recognize this image. This is what we call the 5 R's of a trauma-informed approach. And you can see down at the right-hand corner that this is adapted from SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Agency. So we at Leah's Pantry have added some things to it. If you look at SAMHSA's model, it's actually 4 R's. So we added in the 5th R, resilience, which we're going to be talking about today. And we added so SAMHSA's model really looks at like the adverse side of things, but we look both at positive and adverse experiences. So in the language throughout the model, you see that we talk about realize the impact of adversity and positive experiences. And this is really pulling in like the more current research that talks about PACEs as opposed to ACEs. So ACEs would be adverse childhood or community experiences, while PACEs is positive and adverse experiences. And this is looking at the research that says that positive experiences have an effect as well, right? So it's not just adverse experiences. We talked about this last session. So regardless of the number of adverse experiences that somebody has, if they have more positive experiences, then they will have better health outcomes. So they can kind of work together, which is really exciting because you as practitioners can't always affect something that has already happened in somebody's past, right? But you may be able to have an impact on a positive experience happening right now. So last session, we really stayed in the top 2, the realize and recognize. We're building our foundational understanding of what trauma and adversity are, as well as positive experiences, and how this affects somebody's health. And so today we're moving into the response. We're going to talk about how to respond with trauma-informed practices, policies, and procedures. And in doing that, we're also going to be talking about resilience and how how prevention and healing happen with support and care. So to quickly define resilience, because this is another term that I think gets tossed around a lot, resilience is the process of the body and mind adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And this picture we picked because it represents how this resilience works particularly well when you're working with others, that it's really difficult to build resilience alone. But when you're able to have support and care of others, that will help to build resilience. And so I think an important point to make is you can kind of think of it as like a muscle. If you never lift anything heavy, it's going to be hard to build that muscle. And so just like that muscle, for resilience, you actually do need to encounter some stress in order to have the chance to build up that resilience, but you want to be able to face that stress with support and care. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So when we think about that response, right, I said we're going to spend time talking about our response. Another framework from SAMHSA that can help to shape our response and help enable us to have a trauma-informed response are the trauma-informed principles from SAMHSA. So there's 6 of these. I'm going to briefly walk through them now. And then throughout today's presentation, we're going to kind of call out some of them and how they may show up in this trauma-informed response. So the first one is safety. And then the next is trustworthiness and transparency. And these are oftentimes they will show up kind of together. Trustworthiness and transparency is a really good way to establish safety, right? And when we're talking about safety, it's not just physical safety, but it's also emotional and psychological safety. And it's important to remember that there's not one definition of what is or isn't safe, right? This is like safety is in the eye of the beholder. So how somebody is experiencing something may be and will be different than how you experience it. So it's always important to think about this from the client or the participant's perspective. Peer support, so the opportunity for individuals to provide support to each other. And that's helpful for the receiver, but also for the giver of that support as well. Collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice, and choice, and social and historical contextualization. So these 6 principles would, when you are able to enact these and embed them in your regular day-to-day practices, they will help to promote a trauma-informed response. So we're going to dive into a couple of these throughout today's presentation. We're not going to cover all 6. So let's take a quick Mentimeter break. And are you able to drop the link in the chat? There we go. Perfect. So if you can click the link, or if you want to access this on your phone, you can scan the QR code and let me present.
It's not really a rapid thing once you get into November and December.
There we go. Okay, so the question is, what are ways you quickly establish a relationship and calm environment when you are providing care or just working with community members, depending on exactly what your position is? So we're going to explore this, but I know that you all have ways of doing this yourself. So whenever you first come into contact with somebody, first meet somebody, how do you establish this relationship with them and kind of think about establishing a calm and safe environment? Or how would you? Provide a short introduction with a smile. Yep, smile goes a long way. Keep a calm voice, smile, and make direct eye contact. Yep. And if you're not able to get onto Menti, you can drop something in the chat. That's good as well. Sit at or below their level, smile, walk in slowly. Ask questions about what they like to do to establish a relationship and do active listening. Yeah. So ask if they need anything. Yeah. Introduce myself and talk about my role, answer any questions they have. Great. So there's a lot of this that you're already doing, and that's quite intuitive. And some of it probably comes more naturally to some people than others. Calm voice, supportive dialogue. Yeah. Get out of the screen. Great. So another framework, we love our frameworks, that you guys are, kind of getting at is what we call the 3 R's. So this is a neurosequential model. This is brain science. This is Dr. Bruce Perry's model, if you are familiar with him. And what this is looking at, it's looking at this inverted pyramid, and it's saying that this is the brainstem, right? So at our brain. So the lowest one, regulate, is our lizard brain. This is the brain of children that are having very big feelings, and they this is kind of where they live, right? So when this part of the brain is seeking safety. And so things that may help this part of the brain would be like breath work or movement or sensory play, right? Um, then once your brain feels safe, then you can start to move up into the middle part of your brain. And this is the part of your brain that is that does connection and relations. And so it's seeking connection, it's seeking positive experiences. And then once you're feeling good there, then you can move up to the upper part of the brain that is responsible for reason and reflection. So this is where you can build skills and take in new knowledge. This is the part of the brain that is not very well developed for children, and it takes some time, right? So this is why you have lots of meltdowns with little ones, but it's relevant for adults as well. You can probably all think of a time where you were, not feeling like you were mentally in a place where you could take in information because you were so upset about something, right? So all of the things that you were mentioning about coming in, with a smile and introducing yourself, you kind of mentioned a lot of things in this relate part where we're trying to make this connection. You're not coming in and saying, all right, here's all of the information that you need to go, right? You're not jumping right up to that part of the brain. It's and this seems to be somewhat intuitive for you all. But even so, if we can kind of dive into it a little bit more and be really intentional about it, and you may see ways that you can use this to help with your interactions. So generally, like I said, we're moving from the bottom up, but there's a little bit of nuance. You actually kind of go down and back up again, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this is related to the stress response that we introduced not last week, last month. So we talked about this lightning bolt as being a stressful event, and then you see the chart going way up high, way down low, up into hyper arousal, fight or flight, where you may see anger, anxiety, chaotic feelings, hypervigilance, hyperactive, or it may shoot down to the bottom and be hypo-aroused, which is the fawn freeze response, where maybe you see depression, numbness, withdrawal, shame, disconnection, lack of motivation. In any, if you're hyper or hypo aroused, you're not in a place where you can take in new information, right? That's probably pretty easy to see. And so we can think about how we can use the 3 Rs to get somebody back into the middle. And in the middle, this is where we're calling the window of tolerance, which is rest and digest, right? So in this middle, you see a much smoother, maybe they go up a little bit, but they can handle it, right? They have perhaps built some resilience. They have support and care of others. They're kind of headed up, but they can kind of come back down and regulate themselves a little bit more to stay in the middle. And when we're in this middle state, this rest and digest, we can be flexible, curious, creative. We can self-regulate. We can make decisions. And this is where we can take in that information, right? So by using the regulate, relate, and reason in this middle window of tolerance, this is where we can get to that understanding new information and building of new skills. And so this window of tolerance, there's kind of two, or being able to stay in here, there's kind of two variables here, right? So one of them is how big that lightning bolt is and how big of a reaction it causes, right? Because if it's something really big or your reaction to it is really big, then it doesn't matter how wide your window of tolerance is. It's shooting up out of there, right? But the other variable is the width of these two lines. So if you have this wider window of tolerance, like as shown on the right, then you can withstand a little bit more, right? Whereas if you have a more narrow window of tolerance, like on the left, it's not going to take very much to kind of shoot you into that hyper or hypo state. So acute or frequent adversity and stress tend to shrink our window of tolerance, and it makes it harder to stay in there. Whereas on the right, having support and care, it widens our window of tolerance. So we're better able to cope with the difficult things that life throws at us, right? And this is where the topic of resilience that Crystal's going to talk about later will come in, because having that, being able to build resilience will help to widen this window of tolerance, right? This isn't like something that you're stuck with. It can change over time. So let's tie back in those trauma-informed principles that we mentioned earlier. So how can those trauma-informed principles, if we're enacting them in our interactions with others, how can they help to widen somebody else's window of tolerance? Well, safety. So establishing this physical safety, this psychological safety will help to widen the window of tolerance. So having safe environmental settings, just, walking into the space, and if you it feels unsafe, it feels like it's in a dodgy area of town, or the building itself doesn't seem safe, you're worried about the air quality, or, whatever it may be, then you're already kind of on high alert, right? You already are having a little bit of that stress response. Having body safety as well. So feeling, coming into a lactation care environment, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you're about to go through, right? People are probably going to be, touching you in ways that that is not typical of an experience elsewhere. So having some sense of body safety is important. And psychological safety, feeling safe to ask questions, discuss hopes and fears, and having some sort of affirmation of the caregiver's decisions and their concerns, right? This is a really vulnerable state, especially like right postpartum. And it's a really difficult time for lots of reasons: lack of sleep, stress of a newborn. And if something is challenging with feeding the little one, that's only adding to that stress. So having this feeling safe and feeling affirmed and validated in what you're sharing and not feeling judged is really important to contributing to this safe feeling, which will help to widen that window of tolerance. So like I mentioned before, trustworthiness and transparency really goes hand in hand with safety. It's very difficult to establish psychological safety if somebody does not trust you. But you don't always have very much time to establish that trustworthiness, right? It's not like it can be built. You don't always have the opportunity to build this relationship and this trusting relationship over a lot of time. And so some ways to do this is thinking about relationship building, connection, and we'll talk about self-regulation, right? So you probably can think of a time in your life where you had an interaction with somebody and they were just not regulated. They're talking a mile a minute. They're, maybe they're fidgeting, and they're doing, just things that are making you feel not at ease. And you may not have even realized in the moment, but like that person was not regulated. And because they were not regulated, you're like kind of catching it, right? You're not regulated. So coming in as a regulated person is actually an important first step to somebody being able to feel a little bit more at ease and able to trust you. And so, trust is learned over time, sure, but time is not always on your side. And acknowledging the intensity of the situation. Like I mentioned before, like by definition, this is just a difficult time, even in the best of circumstances. Again, just lack of sleep alone is kind of an intense situation. And adding on to that whatever else may be going on, this can help for that transparency and that psychological safety. Again, they kind of go hand in hand of acknowledging and affirming that, like, yes, this is difficult. This is not just you. So if you don't see it yet, like, why exactly is this neurosequential model important for you and for those you work with? And we'll go back to it to show. So in your work, there's probably a lot of information that you are trying to impart on those you work with. And as you showed in the Menti, like none of you said that you come in hot with all of that information, but that probably is your ultimate goal, that you want to give them information or you want to answer their questions. But if you are very intentional and you say, well, you know what? I know brain science. I know that I can't expect them to go right to this upper level, but I need to kind of acknowledge, I need to check in. Am I regulated? Get a sense for are they regulated? And, maybe spend a little bit of time in that relate. And then you may be able to go up into that skills and knowledge. And this may show up in different ways in your practice. And so I'm going to give it an example, a story from my daughter's life of a time where I was not in that higher level. So my daughter, she had a tongue tie, and we decided to clip it. And so this is when she was first born. We didn't do it right away. So I think apparently when they're real little, real fresh, and if you do it right then, like midwives they told me like have a sharp pinky nail and just like, choop. Not anymore, right? But like back in the day. So we did it. She was like 6 or 7 weeks, which means she's a lot bigger than in the picture, which means she has more blood in her body, right? She's just like a bigger little baby. And so she was still able to just go into the pediatrician to do it. And they put her in the little baby straight jacket swaddle, and they literally just get some scissors and clip the tongue tie. And immediately afterwards, right, it starts to bleed. And then in order to stop the bleeding, just like with anything else, you apply pressure to it. So how they do that is they put her on the breast to nurse. But first we had to get into a different room. So they're walking her down the hall, and she's screaming her head off because you just cut. I mean, this is literally the most painful moment that she has experienced in her life, right? And she's bleeding. I did not realize how much blood there would be. It's like a little baby vampire. And then they stick her on your boob, and then it's just messy. And I was immediately dysregulated, right? And I wasn't prepared for how like upsetting that would be. And you're immediately questioning, like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Was this the best decision? And at that moment is when they give you the aftercare instructions. And so they're like, okay, these are the things that you need to do. And normally I'd be taking notes, asking questions, but I was not in that reason and reflect part of the brain. I was down in my lizard brain, having this, I don't feel safe, and I'm not able to take in this information. So something like this could be an example of, and I remember thinking in the moment, oh man, I really hope they have this written down. Like, I am not taking in anything. If you're giving me any important information right now of what I'm supposed to do with my daughter when I get home, like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to remember it because I'm so dysregulated. So you thinking about, moments where somebody may be able to take in that information and perhaps where they may not be able to take in the information, and how can we best support absorption of that information, right? So is it perhaps giving that information to me before they did the procedure, making sure it is written down, having space for follow-up, right? But so applying this model and knowing when and how to use it can be important in achieving your objectives of sharing whatever it is that you have to share with your patients. And like I mentioned at the beginning, it's not a checkbox of like, okay, we've regulated, we've related. All right, we're ready to take in information, right? You can only stay up there for so long. And so you kind of have the need to come back down and go back up, and maybe you skip a level. So it's something that you need to continually keep an eye on in your relationships and in your interactions with others. So on that note, we are going to talk a bit more about building resilience for new parents and infants. And I think Crystal's going to chat about this.
I think I seamlessly took over. So, okay, thanks, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned, we're going to talk about ways we can widen that window of tolerance, and then also ways we can support individuals and cultivate systems that promote resilience. Let me see if it'll let me go to the next slide. Yeah, okay. In the last session, we asked you this question: what amazes you about the moms or caregivers you work with? And then here's some of the responses. This was in a Menti, just like we did. And so things that you said, paraphrasing, are the folks who could attend last time. Strength and determination came up a lot. Resilience, they are resourceful. The love and care they have for their family or families. Facing so many challenges simultaneously and often with a limited support system. And so this was looking at kind of that individual level. And then we also asked, what are some barriers that you see to breastfeeding and chest feeding? And these are some things that you mentioned. So healthcare system barriers, work schedule, which kind of ties into the social determinants of health, structural issues as far as our systems, right, and the environment, family support issues, and their birth experience. So we typically put protective factors or positive experiences into these 3 buckets. We're big on buckets at Leah's Pantry. You hear us say that word a lot. And 3 is something that we do a lot. So strong families and communities, rituals and traditions, and self-healing practices. So when we look at strong families and communities, we often think about, it takes a village. And a trauma-informed approach does include factors that are related to the local ecosystem or those social determinants of health. Looking at, if y'all are familiar with the socio-ecological model, we talk about a lot in public health with the individual systems environment kind of going out. For rituals and cultural traditions, this can be thinking about maybe cultures where breastfeeding really is central to that culture, way of life. And then thinking about maybe our culture and our thoughts on breastfeeding or chest feeding. And then how this ties to the individual is that we know when environments support women or primary caregivers, then they can do the kind of self-care that they need. And we all need that, right, to take care of ourselves. So here, we're going to show 2 slides that are just kind of this list of protective factors, more specifically within those buckets. So social connections, I'm just going to point out like social connections and concrete support in times of need. So, and y'all mentioned this, do they have the support that they need? So paid leave, public facilities, thinking about all of those things that do support women, children, people who breastfeed, and caregivers. And then knowledge of parenting and child development. So classes, consultations, what information that you want to convey, as Carrie mentioned, and, what they need to get in that space to digest that information and really take it in. And then here's another list just to point out a couple. So incorporating traditional knowledge and cultural values in educational materials and support resources. So are you like the communities you're working with, are the materials you're given out or the information that you're talking about, is it relevant for them and their culture and the people? And then positive racial and ethnic identity. So here we know that representation and visibility of lactation professionals of color is really important, like in any other profession. And many of these experiences can be cultivated through some community-based lactation resources. So we're looking at the individual and then what can that village do to really support families. So many of these protective factors incorporate the trauma-informed principle of peer support. And SAMHSA defines that as those with lived experiences of trauma, but also a lived experience similar to the program participants. So, working with people, one way you can incorporate this into your work is if you do offer programs or classes, or you're helping develop those, make sure that those classes encourage participants to learn from each other, right? Acknowledging the wisdom in the room, thinking about who's there and their experiences and sharing with each other. And that can help build connections. It encourages participants to share their own strategies and skills and resources. And community-based support groups often reinforce the trauma-informed principles that Carrie mentioned earlier of safety and trust, because meetings in a community-based support group area are often in neighborhoods and places where people are familiar with, right? So it's important to try to do that, like a local community center, a library, places where people are, like go to where the people are, instead of maybe having to come into a clinic or come in somewhere like that. So this also kind of thinking about structural issues and those social determinants of health, it's important to kind of look at the social and historical contextualization of the community, of the people you're working with. We know that there are race and health inequity and disparities, maternal mortality rates in particular are higher amongst people who are not white, so people of color, and kind of looking at that and acknowledging that. Research shows that, women are fully aware of maternal mortality rates, and kind of addressing that, acknowledging that, and then working on those barriers is really important. And that can be part of that community-based lactation resources that you're giving out. Also advocating for policies like paid parental leave and public facilities, advocating for more representation and visibility of lactation professionals of color, and just making sure everything is disseminated in a culturally sensitive way. So all of these protective factors that we just kind of went over, and then things that Carrie was talking about, they really help promote and inspire hope, meaning and purpose, connection with a person's body, their spirit, their spiritual, and then autonomy and self-efficacy. So healthy communities support individuals in those communities who then can also support the community. So it's important to think about this as more of a reciprocal relationship, right? We're made up of, our communities are made up of people, and those people are living there. So if we support them, then they can support the communities. Okay, I think we are going to take a quick break now. So how's everybody feeling? Maybe 5 to 7 minutes? 7? We'll do 7 so people can stand up and stretch. So please come back in 7 minutes, so 52. See you then.
And I'm putting the link to the sign-in sheet again. Just make sure you guys sign in, helps us with attendance. And if you want CEUs, if you are a nurse, it's in the chat.
Okay, we're gonna get started again. If you can hear my voice, walk towards it. You can give me an emoji. I got thumbs up. Great. Get myself together. Okay. Okay. So we're going to spend the next little over maybe an hour talking about still talking about ways to respond, right? So we're still thinking about the 5 R's that Carrie reviewed. We're still looking at our response. And so this section, we're going to talk about trauma-informed strategies for client or patient conversations. So within a trauma-informed system, our goal is to be prepared so that we can be responsive during challenging situations, interactions instead of being reactive. So we want to be responsive, not reactive. So front loading means integrating trauma-informed strategies into your office visits or consultations programs before you need them, so that you can use them throughout your time with the people you're working with, your patients or your clients. So this enables you to call upon these strategies whenever you need to. So if you already have this built into your plan for the day, then if you need it, it's there instead of something happens and you're like, oh, what's that thing that I need to remember to try to do right now, which could possibly cause you to get dysregulated. I mean, it would me. I like being prepared. So weaving strategies throughout your work creates a grounding and supportive environment too. So that's that safety that we talked about, which helps build the trust. And that sets everyone up for success, including you, because you're obviously part of this. And because you've established a baseline of using these activities, it isn't odd or uncomfortable when you do decide to use them if it's something you've already incorporated in and really thought through. So for the next part, so here's kind of how we're going to lay out this section. We're going to talk about preparing, so before the visitor conversation. Then we're going to talk about connecting. So setting the stage for a connected and compassionate conversation. Then we'll talk about educating and supporting. And then we'll close it all up, that section. And think about, what do you want your patients or clients to feel after the visit? And so for the first section, we're going to have Carrie set that up and we'll talk about preparing.
Okay. Just going to let you keep driving, Crystal.
Okay. Yep.
Next. Okay. So we've been using this term regulation a lot and probably should have moved this slide up earlier, but what exactly do we mean? I think this is another term that gets thrown around a bit. And this emoji scale is kind of similar to what we opened with, right? So emotional regulation is simply how can we manage our emotions and our behavior and reaction as a result of those. So when we are regulated more towards the left on this emoji scale, we are able to control or manage our emotional response. And when we are dysregulated, it's simply the opposite. We're unable to control or manage our emotional responses. I think really easy examples of these are the toddler that has an absolute meltdown, screaming, crying, stomping feet because their parent won't let them crawl into the oven, right? Or like something to that effect. But you see these really outsized emotional reactions when somebody is just unable to regulate their emotions. And it's not just with toddlers. We see it in ourselves. I'm sure that you can think back on a time where you had a perhaps outsized emotional reaction for a situation. And maybe in hindsight, you could see it. And maybe in hindsight, you could say, I think that I was pretty tired and that's why I had that reaction. or I was really hungry. I got a little hangry there, right? And so you can kind of, some of it can be a little funny, but it can be, a more serious situation as well. So how do we get better at managing our emotions, at staying in that regulated state, even when something is not going our way? Well, the first step is to be able to self-attune and to have some self-awareness to know where we even are, right? If you're not able to ever check in and you're really out of touch with how your body is feeling, then this may kind of hit you, take you by surprise because you didn't even realize that you were becoming dysregulated. So this self-attunement and awareness is important. So for this, you may ask yourself, how am I feeling in my body? What thoughts are in my head? And what is my emotional state? We talk sometimes about just getting curious, right? And this can sometimes be easy to imagine with that, the toddler in the oven situation of like, let's get curious about why my daughter's losing her absolute mind over something that seems so obvious that she should even know, right? And then you really get curious and you start to establish that connection with them and you start to, have some co-regulation of helping them to calm down and you get to the meat of it and it's not really the oven, right? They had a rough day at school or they just want to spend more time with mommy. They don't want mommy to spend time cooking in the kitchen, right? It's usually something else than what meets the eye. And that is often the case for yourself as well. So by asking yourself these questions, you're really getting curious about like, well, why am I having this reaction right now? How am I really feeling? And how is that going to impact, what I need to do right now? And so this is an important first step of just this self attunement. Now, when you may want to kind of think, hey, maybe I should check in, right? Because this isn't a natural thing. This is really like a practice makes better situation, not even perfect, right? But prior to having, going into conversation with somebody, you could just build this slide out. You may want to, say you're about to go into a conversation with a patient, a client, a participant. You're going to make a phone call or have some sort of a group interaction. You may want to just check in and attune. How am I feeling? How might this affect how I'm about to show up in this situation? And oh, you know what? I'm not feeling great. I'm a little dysregulated. What can I do to help regulate myself so that I can show up in an authentic way? And this is where we would think about breathing, awareness, and grounding. So a breathing exercise, you've probably done some form of, maybe it's called like box breathing, where you breathe in through the nose for 4 seconds. Maybe you hold full, or maybe you go straight to, breathing out through your mouth. So some sort of, breath work to help regulate and bring you back into that window of tolerance, right? So just that deep breath or consecutive 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out, that can go a long way. Another example is something to bring kind of awareness to where you are. And the goal of this is to establish safety, right? Because part of the reason that you're feeling dysregulated is your brain has dropped down and it's saying, I'm unsafe, I'm unsafe. And so by doing some sort of an awareness activity, you can tell your brain, hey, it's okay, you're safe. And so this is a fun one, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it seems more involved. We'll do it right now, but it's something that you can do kind of in a quick and less formal way. So I'm going to walk us through it right now. So first, go ahead and get into a comfortable seated position. Try to have your feet on the ground, really feel your feet touching the ground. And have your spine tall like a stack of pennies. Give your shoulders a little roll, maybe a little neck roll. And let's just do one deep breath in before we get started. Big, big breath in through the nose. Through through the mouth. Okay. So now I want you to look away from your screen and I want you to see 5 things that you can see and really look and name each one in your head. Now I want you to think about 4 things that you can touch and feel. So reach out, maybe the table. Now hearing. Listen for 3 noises. You might need to take your headphones off if you're hearing them. You might need to listen really hard if you're in an office, quiet. Now smell. Can you find any 2 smells? Maybe lift up if you've got a coffee, something nearby. Check out the palms of your hand. Maybe check, did you put deodorant on this morning? Do you smell that? And taste. Is there any taste in your mouth? Something nearby you can take a bite of or take a sip of. Now one final breath in and out. So maybe you've moved a little bit on the regulation scale. I know I did on that emoji scale. I'll say I used this morning after I dropped off my daughter and she was not happy, which made me not happy. And so I started looking around. Okay, pick out 5 things. There's a nice garden at their school. They're doing construction. I had plenty of things to listen to, right? So you can kind of do this just as you're moving about the world. If you work with littles, I do this all the time with my daughter. We turn it into a game of I Spy. So we'll go outside. She's having a meltdown about something. Oh, Chloe, what's 5 things you can see? Well, what can you hear? So you can use this in different ways. But it's a good activity to kind of bring awareness. Another really quick thing that you can do is kind of a grounding activity. So you take your thumb and you just trace it on each fingertip. And you just kind of go back and forth and trace that back and forth. Again, this is really easy to do. This is easy to do in the moment when you're having an interaction with somebody and perhaps you're starting to feel dysregulated because of that other person, right? So you can kind of take that deep breath. You can just trace your fingertips and do all the tools at your disposal to help bring yourself into a more regulated state. And so this is something that takes practice. This is not something that it may not be something that comes naturally, right? Some of you are maybe very regulated humans and good on you. And maybe you already do all of this. Maybe you don't even see a need for it because your window of tolerance is so wide and you're so regulated. So that's great. So for the rest of us, you might need to practice this a little bit more and you may need to experiment about what works for you. So these are some tools in my tool belt. There's a lot of different things, but anything to touch on that, the breathing, awareness, and grounding. Find something that works for you and get in the practice. You have to remind yourself to do it, right? And that really does start with that attunement, because if you're not even paying attention to how you're feeling until you blow up, then it's a little bit too late. And you really want to kind of build this into your regular practice. And so this is good for you, but this is also good for the people who you work with, right? Because it's really important that you are able to show up as a regulated human so that you can connect with somebody else. We use the oxygen mask example for this, right? So you got to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help somebody else. We may say dysregulated people cannot help other people. It's very difficult. And by doing this regulation and by having these tools in your tool belt, you may be able to also help somebody else. You may help to co-regulate when they're not feeling, when they're getting out of their window of tolerance as well, right? So all of this falls into this preparing, right? This step, and moving out of preparing. All right, you've done everything you can to prepare. You've grounded and regulated yourself, and you are ready to show up and connect with somebody. So what are some things, Crystal, that they can do to connect with other people?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. And I want to add we do recognize that y'all don't have a lot of time maybe between seeing patients or clients. And so hopefully the things that Carrie just mentioned is something that you can do in that 3 minutes. And you're looking at a chart or you're trying to review notes from the last time you were talking to this person in whatever way. And so even just a little bit of rubbing your fingertips together or looking around and taking a deep breath, those can be quick things that, again, you've built in. Put a little note. I put notes sometime like breathe, just to remind myself. So thanks, Carrie. So yeah, let's move then into connecting. And so the question that we want to think about is, how do we keep relationships at the heart of a trauma-informed approach to breastfeeding or lactation care? And we talk about all the time at our work that relationships and connection truly are the heart of a trauma-informed approach. Sometimes Carrie and I say that, we want to rebrand a trauma-informed approach to just be a kind person. It doesn't have to be difficult. It's not difficult. We use a lot of big words in public health and social determinants of health and trauma-informed approach. And so, but really for this, it's like, how can we be kind and connect with people as human beings, really? So one way is this concept of beginner's mind. And maybe you've heard of this before. This is a big concept in some Eastern philosophies. And basically it means approaching a situation with openness, like you're experiencing it for the very first time. So like Carrie's daughter when she was a toddler, like seeing a flower for the first time, like that's beginner's mind. You've never seen it before. That's the first time. So for you in your jobs, it's acting like you are brand new that first day. Every day, try to act like this is my first day. And so a good quote for this is, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. And we get this way in our jobs, right? It's like, I've done this same thing every day. I come in, I do this thing every day. So what if we just think before we walk into work, what if this was the first time I'd done that? And I'm not great at this, but I try to remember it sometimes when I'm feeling like, okay, I'm going to get up today, I'm going to go for a run, and then I'm going to do yoga, and then I'm going to sit down at my computer all day because I work remotely. And it's just that cycle. So I'm like, well, what if today, instead of I have to, I get to do these things? So that idea of beginner's mind really promotes curiosity that Carrie mentioned, right? So even if you've talked to that patient or client before, it's, even though you've done it in the past, this is a different time, right? This moment is different than that past moment, and it will be different than that future moment. So be curious about this moment and what's happening in that situation at that time. Curiosity then leads to humility, right? So be aware of your blind spots, your perceptions, and acknowledge that there's a lot you don't know about the person that you're meeting, even if it's the third, fourth, fifth time you've met them. There's still a lot you don't know. And then humility can help lead to a kind of mindfulness in general. And that's really what we're talking about is mindfulness, right? So mindfulness is the awareness of what is happening in the present moment. So not, I've got to do dishes later, or I've got to go pick up my kids later. It's what's happening now and being conscious of that. Self-attunement is really important component of mindfulness that Carrie talked about. And practicing mindfulness can help us realize when our bodies are in that reactive or stress state. So we can think about, now, do I need to just take a deep breath? Like, be more mindful, be aware. And there's a lot of research that shows that practicing mindfulness can help us be less judgmental of ourselves, like cut ourselves some slack, and less judgmental of other people. And at the bottom of this slide, and I think we shared these resources before, there's an research article that is about mindfulness practice. And the title is A Promising Approach to Reducing the Effects of Clinician Implicit Bias on Patients. So being mindfulness can help us kind of recognize our biases, our implicit biases, which as y'all probably are aware, are these unconscious attitudes or perceptions that are often negative about a person or a group of people. And we have these. This doesn't mean you're a bad person, right? But being mindful in the moment can help you check that. Like, am I thinking this about this person because this is an implicit bias? And maybe I have this implicit bias because my past interactions have affected how I feel about this person. But those past interactions are not this present interaction. And it doesn't necessarily, and your perception may not be correct. And that really leads us into reframing. And so I will let Carrie tell a story, and then we'll kind of talk more about reframing.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different examples and stories that you can use for reframing. And as we move through this section, I encourage you to think of your own, because that will make the concepts stick. The first story that I heard when I was new at Leah's Pantry and watching somebody else do this presentation is they gave this example of the crying baby. And I will admit, I did not really resonate or understand the example until I had a daughter of my own. So I will tell this story from the perspective of my experience as a new mom. And so the story is that my daughter, Chloe, was, I don't know, maybe about 6 months-ish. And she, was never a good sleeper, ever. She still is not a good sleeper. And that can be frustrating. And she's going through this phase where like it's especially bad. And thanks to the tongue clip, the tongue tie clip that we did that I talked about before, she was very good at nursing, right? Almost a little bit too good. No bottles, no pacifiers, all mommy. So whenever she was upset, she's like all on me. And she's going through this phase, like a couple weeks, where she's just like really nursing all the time. She's crying, she's fussy, she's not sleeping. And I'm just tired and I'm getting frustrated with her. I mean, like she's 6 months, she's little. She's just like she's not doing things on purpose, right? But I actually do feel frustrated with her. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, why can't you just like other kids are sleeping through the night, And then I'm looking at her and I see a tooth pop up. Oh my goodness, you were teething, right? And the thing that I learned about teething that I didn't know, I thought it just hurts when the tooth comes up. It's the weeks leading up to it. It's this kind of long process of like pain as the tooth is moving up, and you as a parent don't see it, right? So in that moment, my response totally changed from this response of like frustration, why can't you be like the other babies, to oh my goodness, you poor thing. You're in so much pain. Here, let me hold you. Here, let me nurse a little bit. It's okay. Mommy will stay up all night. Whatever you need. I feel so bad. You must be, such pain for a little one, right? So the point of the story is that in this case, I found out what the real story was, right? But by asking a different question, by hearing a different perspective, it elicited a different response from me. And so the act of, being able to reframe, being able to see things differently and not go with your initial assumption of what somebody's behavior is, it can allow you to respond more compassionately. And you're not always going to know, right? You're seeing some frustrating behavior, in this case, the baby crying, but translate that to frustrating behavior from a coworker or from a spouse or a family member, or take it to work, a frustrating behavior from a participant or a patient. And you may never know what is actually causing them to elicit that frustrating behavior, right? You may never actually know the cause, and that's okay. The point of reframing isn't that you're going to find out, oh my goodness, they were teething. That's why. The point is that you're able to switch your own response, that I would have been able to switch my response without needing to know the answer, but just by looking at the situation differently and asking a different question about it. So that's the introduction story. Crystal's going to walk you through some other examples that may help to show you this concept a little bit better.
Yeah, so just to kind of sum up the reframing and a definition, it's really a method used to change the way we approach a situation and examine actions and behaviors from a different perspective. So we have some different kind of steps that you could take, again, just to kind of consciously think about reframing. So the first thing is to really just take a moment and pause. Stop any automatic judgments or assumptions you maybe have. So I think, thinking about mindfulness and curiosity that Carrie talked about, and I just talked about a minute ago, that can help you pause if you've already worked that in and that's been a practice. The next step, again, is to then get curious. Examine your own assumptions and maybe biases that you might be bringing into your work, and examine those a little bit. See, like, why was that assumption being made? And then the final step is try to see, like, what may be another explanation for that behavior that you're seeing. So as Carrie mentioned in her story, she did find out what it was, but what could have been some other reasons that Chloe was crying. So thinking about breastfeeding, maybe you're having a conversation with a mom or a caregiver who's reluctant to breastfeed. So what may be some possible explanations for that? And I invite you, if you feel comfortable, or drop in the chat, like, why could a person be reluctant to breastfeed? What are some reasons other than maybe they just don't want to? Worried about it hurting or how it will change their body. Yeah, and we talked about some of that in the first session, right? About kind of adversity and people being scared without even having any ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, or really having any trauma. Past experience with breastfeeding that didn't go well. I have friends who have been in that situation, and that causes a lot of anxiety for people. And previous pain or lack of support, right? There's a lot of reasons why someone is reluctant to. So again, this is just thinking about all those different reasons and being curious about what's going on. And so we show this picture a lot, and I really like it. The iceberg. I like it for kind of any human behavior. Because we're pretty complex creatures. And I often try to check my perceptions. And so really this is what this image is showing us. Like, what we see in our perceptions are really just the tip of the iceberg. It can be a reaction to the situation that we're seeing. So if there is some behavior that is not what we want or is challenging from a person, that is just the reaction we're seeing. What we don't see are all the things that influence those feelings and behaviors. So it could be their immediate circumstances. Maybe they were rushing, to the appointment and have kids, and maybe that person's, a single mom. It could be their beliefs, preferences, past experiences, cultural values, customs, and traditions. And we could just kind of layer on all this. And I see Jackie put not a cultural norm for them. Exactly. So that's all the things we don't see. And there's so many things we don't see. And so I think that's kind of the point of reframing, is understanding that. And there's no way we can be in somebody's head. We're just not. And then really just thinking maybe my gut reaction just wasn't correct about this. Okay, so you've prepared yourself, you've connected with that person. And so now let's think about ways that you can provide information in a trauma-informed way. So these are some challenging comments or topics that y'all dropped in a Menti we had during our first session. And so we just took those like we did the other ones and put them here to use again. So answering those questions was meaningful and helped kind of build this session. So some things that you mentioned were comments like, I wasn't breastfed and I'm okay. I hear people my age say that a lot about like child safety seats or seat belts. Like, we didn't need those in the 70s. We're fine. Lack of family support is another one. Lack of support from workplaces and social groups. Not enough of a focus on being trauma informed or practicing consent. And that's obviously thinking about the clinician or the person working with the mom or person that's breastfeeding. And then people blaming themselves rather than understanding there's a lot of misinformation and a lack of support. So there are a couple different ways to deliver information and kind of navigate challenging situations in a trauma-informed way. We're going to talk about health coaching techniques and motivational interviewing. And I'm sure that y'all are probably familiar with both of those. So we're just going to add a trauma-informed lens to that. Research does show that these techniques are beneficial in relation to lactation care. So essentially, health coaching is a conversation between the coach and the client or the patient, where the coach collaborates with the person in navigating their own needs and empowers them to achieve goals they've identified and set for themselves. So the person identifies their own goals because they know themselves better than anybody else, and they set those goals for themselves. The coach and the client are partners and co-collaborators. So this isn't like an expert way, like I'm going to tell you you should do this. It is a person-centered approach that recognizes that everyone is unique. And it can be difficult sometimes. I've done some health coaching and you want to say, and I have a public health background, so you want to be like, yeah, but your goal should be this. I hear it in my head, but maybe they just don't want to do that. My dad right now, I really want him to walk every day and try to do a couple miles. It would be good for his joints and his back. And he goes and takes one turn around the mall. And that's what he wants to do. And he feels good about it. And I just have to live with that. That's his goal. He said it. I encourage his goal. So with health coaching, it is more of an information exchange. So the educator or consultant really acts as a guide more than anything else. So clarifying misinformation, offering suggestions, and offering suggestions sometimes if you're asked. And this can be, we call elicit, provide, elicit in health coaching. So you elicit by asking an open-ended question, which we'll talk about more in a minute. And then you provide the information with permission. So you ask them, can I provide some information? And then you follow that up with an open-ended question. So it could go something like, what do you know about breastfeeding? And they could tell you. And then you say, well, may I share some information with you? And then you share that information. And then you follow it with, what questions do you have about what I just said? And that's a really good tool to kind of find out what they already know, and you're not making assumptions about that. So that's helping you check your bias. And then making sure that they've reasoned and kind of processed the information that you gave them by asking that follow-up question. And then another kind of health coaching technique is really assisting. Here you would be assisting the mom or caregiver with making an action plan or setting goals. And in health coaching, we call goals experiments a lot because that doesn't have the same pressure of if you didn't meet your goal. Instead, it's like, over the next week, what would you like to try as an experiment? And then think about them that way and see what sticks, instead of, well, you didn't meet that goal. Now that person may feel shame or be frustrated with themselves, and that could lead to a setback. So there's less pressure if it's thought of more as an experiment. Health coaching does differ from typical health education, which usually involves kind of a person in this expert role who's trying to solve their problems and trying to prescribe solutions. Well, you should try to breastfeed this many times a day. I don't know. But that should word. And health education often has these standardized messages that maybe aren't appropriate for all people and cultures. I mean, evidence-based is always what we want, right? But there's ways that we can convey that information in ways that are person-centered, individual, taking into account their experiences, and also, based in thinking about culture. So motivational interviewing, and this gets kind of used outside of health coaching, but the definition is it's a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication. And it was developed actually over 30 years ago as an innovative approach to the treatment of addiction. It's designed to strengthen personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring a person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Motivational interviewing consists of a lot of different components and techniques. There's been books written about just motivational interviewing alone. But research shows that there are 3 elements of motivational interviewing that are particularly effective in lactation care. So these elements are the use of open-ended questions, mindful listening, and statements of affirmation about a mom or a caregiver's choice to breastfeed. So we're going to take just a minute and go through each one of these individually. Before we do that, though, I do want to read this quote because it's really important. Doing motivational interviewing with someone is like entering their home. One should enter with respect, interest, and kindness, affirm what is good, and refrain from providing unsolicited advice about how to arrange the furniture. So motivational interviewing really only works if the educator or the clinician does not have a set agenda. So if you have a set agenda and you're trying to move a person towards that agenda, that's manipulative. So that can backfire on you, and that can erode trust and that sense of safety. So it's really important to go into any kind of conversation using motivational interviewing with a beginner's mind, with curiosity, and with that, openness to maybe even learn from that person. It is that two-way street in health coaching. So thinking about open-ended questions, these are questions that are worded in such a way that elicit a meaningful and thoughtful response. And they often start with the words how, what, why, and tell me. I say tell me a lot. That's my favorite one. Tell me more about that. Close-ended questions, on the other hand, they elicit a single word answer or a nondescript phrase and often start with do you, have you, will you, are you, or can you? Here are some examples of open-ended questions that could maybe be used when talking to a new mom or a person who is breastfeeding or chest feeding. What are your thoughts about bottle or breastfeeding? Tell me about your previous breastfeeding experience. What support do you have around your feeding decision? How can I best help you today? What kinds of educational information have you received or heard about? What would you like to do? And again, so these questions help us check our assumptions and our unconscious biases while also learning about the person's experiences and feelings. So it helps you learn what they already know and what they've been through and where they're at. So the next is mindful listening. And I saw someone else put maybe on the Menti about active listening. And that's the same thing, right? We call it many different things. So mindful listening, active listening, deep listening, reflective listening, all that can be kind of bucketed under mindful listening. So this is the full non-judgmental awareness of what someone is saying in the present moment. Truly, one of the most important things we can do is to fully listen to someone when they are speaking to us. And mindful listening is not easy. Our culture really isn't set up for it, right? We're busy, we're going, we're doing, we're looking at our phones, we're distracted. And we often think about how we're going to answer their question or answer or respond to a comment while they're still talking. So like, have we completely heard and then pause and then move forward? And our culture just isn't set up for that. We're really fast paced in our interactions. So here are some tips that I find helpful. So try not to think about what you'll say next until your client or patient has spoken the last word of his or her or their thought. Try not to interrupt. Pause after a mom or a caregiver has spoken. All those things can help you with that. So reflections can be used in conjunction with mindful listening because it's a tool to help you practice that, but it also shows that you have been listening to them. So a reflection is when you repeat back what you heard. That shows that you've been listening. And it also, though, helps you make sure you understood the person. So it's checking those biases. There's kind of two different types of reflections. One is just a simple reflection. So you just repeat what the person said, or you slightly rephrase it. So for example, a mom might say, "It hurts when I breastfeed." So you could say and respond, "It's painful for you." That's what she said. And that's simply what you're doing. You're not trying to look more into it. You're just making that statement, and that says to her or them that you heard them. A complex reflection, it goes deeper and then just repeating what the person said. And these can be tricky, but it's okay. The one thing to remember, it's okay to get it wrong because at least they know that you were listening, and it helps kind of with the conversation. So one type of complex reflection is positive reframing. And these are, obviously we talked about reframing earlier, but this is a type of complex reflection. So an example is, let's say the mom or person says, I tried pumping, but it was more complicated than I thought it would be, and I got frustrated and I quit. So a way to positively reframe that, and is a reflecting back to them that you heard them. While it didn't turn out how you had hoped, you are mindful of your thoughts and feelings during the process. So that's kind of spinning that. It's not focusing on the negative that that person quit. Instead, it's realizing that they were thinking about it and it was complicated and they got frustrated and they're telling you they did. And so that's why they quit. Another example is, I feel bad giving her formula at bedtime, but it just seems like she sleeps better when I do. So a way to positively reframe that is, you want to do what's best for your daughter. And of course they do. Like, not being able to breastfeed when you should, it's best. You know that breast milk is good. But not being able to do that has to be shameful, and so you reframe that by saying, but yeah, but you know what's best. You want to do what's best for your daughter. Of course you do. And so then the next element of motivational interviewing is statements of affirmation. These are positive statements that regarding a person's character or values that acknowledges her, his, their strengths and efforts. It's not just praising or complimenting someone. That can come off really hollow. These can be really empowering because you're highlighting a person's values, something that you know they hold dear, and it can promote confidence and help the patient or client focus more on their abilities and less on their barriers. Statements of affirmation also encourage persistence. When a person feels confident, it can help them move in a positive direction. And then if you emphasize a person's strengths, it helps decrease defensiveness. And that can happen in interactions like you're having. So let's look at some examples here. So again, you could say, you know what's right for yourself and your baby, depending upon what comments are and what you're hearing. You're committed to making this a priority because you know how much you and your baby will benefit from it. You know what your body needs. You're not afraid to move out of your comfort zone, if they're trying something new. You stuck to your goal even though it was challenging to do so. Or a good one to use in health coaching is, if a person doesn't quite meet their goal, try to focus on, well, you were able to do it this many times. And that's good. You tried it. It was that experiment. How did that go? You were successful for this many times. Or, okay, well, you tried that. And let's see what else maybe you can try this week. So these health coaching and motivational interviewing techniques incorporate the trauma-informed principle of collaboration and mutuality. And this is where we recognize that people are the experts of their own lives. And we've talked a lot about that in the first session in this one. And then, the other part of that is recognizing that health and well-being require these quality relationships and meaningful power sharing and decision making. So by practicing deep listening and asking questions and being curious, you're building those relationships and helping level those power differences, which leads into empowerment, voice, and choice. And that is part of what that is. And it can be difficult to level those differences, especially in doctors' offices. It can be really intimidating for people. And then the other part of empowerment, choice, and voice that you can see in health coaching and motivational interviewing is that you're supporting their dignity and ability to shape their own lives by emphasizing their strengths, autonomy, and self-advocacy. So real briefly, we do want to mention weight. This comes up a lot in conversations, and we talked about weight in our Well, we talked about body image and societal messaging in our first session, and how we're kind of women in particular, and transgender and non-binary individuals are inundated with various messages. And there is this idea of being thin in our culture that just is there, it's been there, it's going to be there. And we did talk about how research shows that people who have problems and have difficulties breastfeeding, they can, it has been associated with eating disorders and obsessive compulsive behavior. So what we see about weight is that women's weight status is not just a metric of our health in our culture, is how it's seen, but it's often conceptualized as a metric of our self-worth and societal value. And so what we kind of emphasize and we've seen is with body dissatisfaction is promoting the importance of health, overweight, validate concerns about appearance and weight. It can be difficult to talk about people, women are supposed to look a certain way, but when we acknowledge that we do want to look like care about our appearance, sometimes it's like, well, she's vain, or, there's this weird stigma that comes with that in our culture. And the fact is, we do care how we look. Everybody does. We are humans. And so validate concerns about appearance and weight. And then promote positive self-talk. Modeling that, talking about that, like focusing on the things you do like about a person's body or they like, that's all really important. And that kind of then though leads into body neutrality. And so with the goal of this, it isn't that we love our bodies every single day, because that may not be possible. Instead, it's to be free of thinking about how our bodies look every single day. So it's not, I hate my body. It's not, I love my body. It's, I don't think about my body every day. And that may be something that is more reasonable and realistic for us all to strive towards. Just to be free of thinking about that every day. Okay, so we prepared, we connected, we participated in some conversations and supported folks, provided some education. And so then how do we end these conversations? Well, the first thing to do, or one of the things to do, is to reaffirm the person's choices. Think about the goals or action plan that maybe was developed during and it doesn't have to be like a big plan, like what are 2 goals you want to try to work on? Use a confidence scale. We do this a lot in health coaching, and that's just like on a scale from 1 to 10, like how confident are you that you can work on this in the next week? And let them give you a number and then ask why they chose that number and it wasn't lower or it wasn't higher. You don't want it to be 10 because maybe that's not challenging enough. A 7 or an 8, that's pretty good. That's pretty challenging. A 4, that's too low. That means that the goal needs to be reworked before they leave so that it is something that's attainable. Provide resources and additional support. And then, how are you going to follow up? Is there a next visit? Are you checking in with them, or who's following up? And this may not apply to all of you in your roles. Yeah, so that concludes that. Carrie?
All right. So our last section today is talking a little bit about self-care, which is tied to the idea of self-awareness as well. And this is, I think, another term or topic that we want to kind of shift your understanding of, based on what you might see just on social media or how self-care often gets talked about. We want to talk about it a little bit differently. So the first idea is why are we going to talk about self-care in this training that's trying to promote employing trauma-informed practices when you're working with community? Well, this is because of something that I mentioned earlier, that this trauma-informed approach really starts with yourself, and it's tied to the idea of what we talked about earlier with, you need to show up regulated. It's difficult to show up regulated if you have no self-care. It's difficult to connect with others if you're in such a state of disarray. So self-care can support this authentic, regulated self. And from there, you're then able to establish those connections and compassionate relationships that Crystal talked about. And remember, compassionate relationships and connection, that helps to support resilience. It helps to widen the window of tolerance. It helps people to be able to move up the brainstem, right? So that they're ultimately able to take in the information that you're wanting to share with them. So all of what we're talking about today is really connected. And so from these compassionate, relationships, kind of one-on-one, we can move into healing communities. So that it really is this kind of ripple effect out, starting with you as an individual.
Hey, sorry, are you
Mhm.
sharing? Because I think I'm still sharing.
Okay. I thought
I was following you. I just didn't know if you want me to keep going.
go ahead. Oh, you know what? I think, can you stop sharing? I think it's shared in a weird, like at the same time. Okay.
Yeah, Zoom does that now. Sorry about that. I think
It's
I was
okay.
keeping up though.
All right. So here's our ripple effect outward. So let's take a little pulse check. What are, do you need more self-care? Are you fatigued or have a lack of energy? Yes. Irritability, impatience, anger, feeling busy but not feeling accomplished. This is a big one for me. Difficulty concentrating or remembering. Feeling like the only one who can help everyone. These may be some signs. They are not the only signs, but they may be some signs that maybe you need a moment to check in with yourself. And what are some of the, beyond those? Those are like, these are things that anyone may experience. But as somebody, working in particular in any sort of professional setting, but in particular in a professional setting where you are working with communities, with at-risk communities, or working in like a medical setting, then there may be some other risks for you specifically. Compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, moral injury, workplace culture and dynamics, and burnout. Moral injury, I'll kind of define that one a little bit. That one may be a little bit less familiar of a term. So this is common in a healthcare setting where the system itself can impede on one's moral responsibility for care. So, for instance, maybe somebody knows the right thing to do and wants to be able to do it, but institutional constraints make it nearly impossible to pursue the right course of action. So you know that somebody needs something to support them, a patient or a participant, but you're unable to provide that support to them. So when we think about self-care, we're going to kind of borrow again buckets. This time 4, not 3, but this is from one of our someone who we worked with a while back, Dr. Sam Himmelstein, and he talks about that in order for us to really be there for other people, to be able to connect with them and provide support to them, we have to be balanced ourselves. And when we're out of balance, it's distracting and it makes it difficult for us to truly tune in, listen to, and connect with others. And so the 4 things that he talks about that we can do to care for ourselves are relaxation. Now, this can look any sort of way, right? Everyone relaxes differently. So I want you to kind of get out of your head any sort of stereotypical examples of like, I have to do a spa day, or I have to like you don't have to relax in any certain way. Like I will tell you, sometimes doing the dishes is relaxing to me because it's a somewhat mindless task that I'm getting lots of dopamine hits from because the dishes are clean afterwards and my brain really likes it. And then I feel relaxed doing it, right? So like there's no right way to practice self-care. That's why it's called self-care, right? It is a very individualized thing that you're trying to do. So relaxation, that may look different for you than it does in this picture. Mental or physical activity. So maybe this is going for a run, like you see in this picture. A lot of people like to run. I like to run. That is definitely a form of self-care for me. Maybe it's doing a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku puzzle, right? So you don't limit yourself to kind of, again, these like more stereotypical things. So like what is just mentally or physically challenging? That is a form of self-care. Creativity. Now, this could be creating, I think this picture is, pottery or a beautiful painting. Maybe you are a truly artistic and creative person. Maybe you're not like me. Maybe that means you don't really use this bucket a lot, or maybe there's creativity in different ways. Creativity in telling a story to a kid, or creativity in how you come up with a solution to your Excel spreadsheet and it's so creative and beautiful. That's my form of creativity, right? Not a typical one. Or maybe it's creating a beautiful dish and getting really creative because you don't have all of the ingredients. And maybe it doesn't look beautiful, but it was a creative process for you, right? So really think outside of the box and think this is a good opportunity to really reflect on this for yourself. And the last one is asking for what's needed. It is difficult to be the sole provider of your self-care. And so part of self-care may be asking for help. It may be asking, if you think about kind of what are the challenges to your self-care or what are the things that get in the way of it, then that may help to identify areas where you need to ask for help. So the other thing that I want to kind of acknowledge about self-care is that it can be work, right? I remember when I was a new mom and people were like, oh, you got to take care of yourself first. And I was like, yeah, okay, who's going to take care of the baby? Like, is she going to just do it herself? Like, there are certain realities and restrictions to self-care, and it can be a challenge. It's not necessarily an easy, enjoyable, relaxing spa day, right? Like, it takes some work, but if you're able to accomplish even small bits of it, then it is important not only for yourself, but it's important for your work and for the people that you serve. And if we're talking about authentic self-care, kind of a test for this is that it should feel good now and later, right? So maybe that first glass of wine is really relaxing and you're enjoying having some good conversation with somebody else. But maybe by the third or fourth, like maybe that's not going to feel good later. Maybe that is not really authentic self-care. Or the shopping that maybe you regret later, right? So I think a lot of self-care, like treat yourself, right? That maybe is promoted in other venues. If you apply this test to it and think back to those four buckets of where it could or could not fit in, that may help to determine, is this really self-care or is this avoidance or something else? And then, the final note and kind of sales pitch for self-care is that it really is allowing that connection itself is a form of self-care, but also if you have some sort of self-care practice that is promoting you to be a regulated person and self-attuned, then you are going to be able to better connect with the people in your life. And that really is why we include it in our professional building capacity building trainings, right? So that is, we've got some sources. We're going to share these with you later. But that wraps up what we have for you today. We do have a podcast, and I was just told yesterday that it is now also on Apple Music and I don't know, a bunch of other places. So I think kind of at this point, wherever you find your podcasts, check us out. It's called Stocking the Pantry. And we also have a peer learning community. This is a space where you can, it's kind of like Reddit style. So you can post questions and respond to other people. And it's just geared towards anyone working in the space of nutrition security. So it's nutritionsecurityplc.org. And then I think this is, Jackie may have some reminders about what you need to do for to get those CEUs. So with that, we, thank you all for your time. Hope that you were able to take away a couple ideas of things that you may want to integrate into your regular practice. And I'll let Jackie kind of close out any of the logistics.
Yes, thank you guys so much. I just dropped in the chat the evaluation. So please fill it out whether you attended both sessions, one session, part of a session, and then definitely fill it out. It's required if you want the CEUs, if you're a licensed nurse, if you're a registered nurse. So I'm just going to give everybody, it should only take you about 5 minutes. So I would love if everyone just clicked on the link in the chat right now. If you prefer to read it in Spanish, like if you open the link, it'll have a little drop down if you want it in Spanish. So we're just gonna give it 5 minutes of quiet for everyone to fill that out and maybe think of some questions that you might have. Lots of kudos coming through the chat about learned so much today about self-care. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
You all. And Andy, I saw your comment above about community care. I didn't see that during the talk, but really great points.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Mary Beth Moran. I co-chair the health domain for the Childhood Obesity Initiative. And I really appreciate both of these workshops. And today I really enjoyed the reframing and the whole emphasis on self-regulation and coming to the table as a whole person. As clinicians, so many people don't consider that, and it's so important. So thank you for all of these messages. It was wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you have some specific things to walk away with. The reframing is always something that I think is, we call it like a sticky topic. Like it just kind of sticks in there. It's really easy to apply. And I think when you said, showing up as a whole person, I was taking a trauma course myself, and the instructor talked about like, this is a lifestyle. This is not something that you can just turn on and off. You can't like embody a trauma-informed approach only when you're like, okay, I'm about to go work with somebody. Let me turn this on. Like, because it takes so much practice and so much, yeah, I don't know, that just really stuck with me, that it's like, okay, I need to like look at my whole life. I need to
Yep.
think about how I'm interacting with my husband, with my kid, with my parents. Like, this is not just something to turn on and off when I show up
Right.
to work.
Well, thank you. And as soon as it goes up on the website, we'll certainly host it here at Ready Children's, because whether they're a lactation specialist in our NICU or a nurse assisting a mom with a child who's still breastfeeding on the units, it'll be really helpful.
Great.
So thank you.
Good to hear.
Okay, we are at 11 o'clock. So I want to just again thank Crystal and Carrie so much. Feel free to hop off. Everyone, I can stay on for a second if you're just still completing the evaluation. Healthcare domain, we have no work group meeting in January because we did November and December.
Self-care. Use your time wisely.
Yes, self-care, enjoy the holidays. We will definitely let everybody know when this is up on our website. We'll promote it in our newsletter, and make sure everyone has a link to either watch it for yourselves, pass it on to colleagues, friends.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Stop the recording.